Ian Rush signed for Liverpool, he signed for, at that time, a huge fee for a teenager. He was 18, it was £300,000, and he came straight into Liverpool dressing room, and I think he was a little bit in awe of everybody in there, just as I was. And at that time, everybody was into the wind-up, and you know, he came in and he had this moustache, and Douglas soon started calling him Moma because he had this moustache and the way he dressed. And I don't think he was too happy in the first sort of 6 months to a year until he found out what life was all about, and as much as they were winding him up to make him part of the thing, he thought people were winding him up to have a go at him, and he didn't realise that people were winding him up to try and make him comfortable. And it was amazing the transformation, because latterly he was the man that was winding everybody up. But the first 6 months at Liverpool, it was difficult for him. And I watched him play, and I'll tell you, it was funny because I'm thinking, this is a player that no pace, bad in the air, not got two good feet. What has he got? And we actually played a reserve game. I'd been injured and I came back, and we played against Preston reserves in Preston. And John Blackley, who was a mate of mine who played for Hibs and Celtic, Newcastle, was at Preston, and he played centre back against Rush. And we went for a drink afterwards, and we started talking about Ian Rush. And he said to me, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, I think, you know, Liverpool had a great policy of buying players, but I think they've got a bad in here with Rush." I said, "Because I've watched him for 6 months, he's got nothing." And Blackley said, "Well, I tell you what, I feel the same way." She's like, "You know, I can't believe they bought him because no pace, hopeless in the air, can't read it, you know, doesn't get on the end of things." So 4 years later, Blackley and I are having another drink, and Rush, by that time, scored 230 goals and broke all goal scoring records in the history of Liverpool Football Club. And Blackley turns to me and he says, "Do you think we're good judges of players?" And it was through the transformation, and it was actually great to be at Liverpool and watch the progress of Ian Rush throughout the years, because he just got better and better and better, and in the end he could destroy you in training. I had a bad 3 months at Liverpool, and I put it down to him. If you played against him in training, he was so sharp that if you had the ball at your feet, you'd be watching, and you know, instead of being focused on what you were doing, you'd be looking for him coming to come close. And I'm sure defenders all over the world felt the same way. And people will talk about his goals being the biggest factor of his success, but his contribution outside the box is phenomenal. I think that him and Douglas started the policy of defending from the front, where Rush would close down quickly and Douglas would put his foot in. He was just phenomenal. You know, to play on a side with Ian Rush at that time, sort of between 83 and 85, before he went to Italy. You know, he scored goals for fun, but again, the contribution outside the box was just magnificent. As long as I've played in England, he's head and shoulders above any of the goal scorers. Not only because his goals, but because the contribution outside the box. You'll get guys that were phenomenal goal scorers. John Aldridge at Liverpool was incredible, and watching him play for Tranmere now, the great thing about Aldridge at Liverpool was that any time the ball was near the opposition's penalty box, he'd be right in the middle of the goals, waiting for the rebound, and you can guarantee that every time that the ball was wide, he'd be in the middle of the goals. But his contribution outside the box wouldn't have been in the same league as Rush's. Great player, and a great player for Liverpool, John Aldridge, and a great character as well. But Rush, in those days, was so far in front of anybody else. And I'm not just saying that because I played alongside him and he played for Liverpool. I think that anybody that played at that time and played against him would say the same thing, that he's definitely been the best of the best. Well, I couldn't believe that he didn't play well in Italy, that he wasn't successful. I mean, he had the glandular fever thing, and you would have said that any player going to Italy at that time would have, if they had a chance of being successful, been him, because he was just so good. But at the same time, I think he found the problem in Italy as he found it initially when he came to Liverpool. He came from a mining village in Wales. He was a close-knit community. I think he missed his family, his friends, and he just didn't settle in. It took him a year to settle into Liverpool, and after a year in Italy, he was back. But again, it was great to see him back, because we've got a world-class player back. He scored 2 goals in the cup final that year, and won the championship the next year. And any time that you're in a side and a player of that reputation and class comes back into the side, then obviously it's going to benefit everybody. And it was just good to see him back. Graham Souness, for me, was one of the great players in the middle of the park, not only for Liverpool but in English football. He had the absolute lot. Well, when I say the absolute lot, I mean, yeah, he wasn't the quickest player again, but he was sharp up top, and he's never saved high attitude, and his willingness to win, and his captaincy was poles apart from anybody else I played with. I think the sign of a great captain is not when you're 3-0 up and you're playing well. I think it's when you're 3-0 down and you're playing badly. Now in that situation I'd be wanting off as a captain. When I'm 3-0 down and I'm playing badly, I want off. That's why I wasn't a great captain. But Souness would be trying harder at that stage than he would be trying when the game started. But apart from that, he was a fantastic player. He was great in the ball. He was strong, great touch and technique, wonderful passer of the ball, scored great goals, inspirational as a player, inspirational as a captain, and one of the best players that ever played for Liverpool. I was surprised when I became captain of Liverpool, simply because I never thought of myself as a captain. And latterly talking to Kenny, because you never asked him at the time, why did you make me captain, Kenny? Because he would have snarled at you. But you know, when it was all finished and we were out and having a drink and whatever, and I said, why did you make me captain? He said, because I thought you were lucky. He actually thought he was quite superstitious, Kenny. He always thought I was lucky, so I'll make him captain because he's lucky. But I'll never forget, it was we were playing Brighton in a pre-season friendly after the Heysel disaster. Obviously couldn't play abroad, and we played this series of friendlies in England. We were at Brighton, and Phil Neal had been the captain. He wasn't playing that night, and Kenny came up to me and he didn't say you're going to be captain. He says, you take the ball. I said, what do you mean you take the ball? He said, you take the ball. I said, what do you mean take the ball? He said, you take the mickey. I said, no, what do you? He says, I want you to be captain. Oh, right, well, yeah. And then captain of Liverpool. We won the double and I was captain of the double one inside. I could never be a great captain because simply that when I was having a bad time, I was wanting the game to finish, you know, and that's the sign of bad captain. The inspirational captains are the ones that I've said before. That Tommy Smith was a great captain, Graham Souness was a great captain. I just wasn't so good as a captain, but it certainly helped me because I thought that how can I be a good captain? Or how can I be a decent captain? Lead by example. So if you can go on the pitch and play well and show your colleagues that you know you are playing well and you're doing the right thing and you're playing for the team, then they might follow that lead. And I think that was one of the good things of me being captain, was that I was pretty popular in the dressing room, and you know, players would respond to whatever I said in the pitch. I'd been there a long time, and if I did say anything to one of the senior players, then you know, they wouldn't come back at me. They would accept it and get on with it, just as I had done, and just as anybody that, if the senior players had said anything to me as a captain, then I wouldn't take the huff, I would take it on board. But basically I was the communication between Dalglish and the dressing room, because it was difficult for him suddenly being a player to becoming a player manager, because it was very much a them and us situation. He was now the manager, he was at the dressing room, and he needed a voice in the dressing room, and whilst I was still very much a player, and if it came to the bit where you know there was a problem between the manager and the coaches and the players, I'd always been the player's side. There was no doubt about that. I was still one of the players, but I could still be a voice for him in the dressing room, and it worked pretty well because we won the double that season, his first year as player manager. And it was funny again because around about March that time, Kenny and I went for dinner with the two wives. We'd just been beaten by Everton in the league, and we were sort of 12 points behind. We were still in the cup. And we got up for dinner. He said, what do you think? I said, Kenny, I'll be honest with you. And I said, I think this is the worst Liverpool side I've ever played in, barring none. And he looked at me and he said, well, isn't he going too well at the minute? He says, but I'll tell you what, I think that if we could just get some sort of lift from somewhere, then if we could get a run, we could still do some. And of course, me being always been negative, I said, you're dreaming. I said, we will win nothing this season. We haven't got a prayer. Our only hope is maybe the cup, but I think if we get a bad draw away from home, we'll get beaten. And then, of course, 2 months later, I'm picking up the cup at Wembley and done the double. And the bit of inspiration was he came back and played, and he picked himself. I don't think he was the best player in the last 12 or 13 games. And it's funny because people would look at that time and say, well, Dalglish picked himself and he was the difference coming back. But the best player in the last 12 or 13 games for us was Kevin McDonald, who was fantastic. But Kenny came back, took all the headlines as player manager, was the first player manager in history to pick up the league title. Every year before it was the captain who picked it up. So he comes to Anfield the last game of the season and he picks up the league title. And of course I'm a bit miffed, and he said, it was Peter Robinson said I've got to go and pick it up. And I said, oh yeah, and what's happened the last 20 years in the league? It's the captain that picks it up. The captain takes all the glory, and we had a bit of laugh about it. And he said, oh well, I promise you this much, if it's at Wembley and against Everton in the cup final, you can go up the steps. I said, oh thanks very much, I can go up there, very nice you can, that's good. And of course, we won the last game of the season to win the championship at Chelsea, and we had a horrific record at Chelsea. And when the fixtures come out, you always look at them and we say, imagine having to go to Chelsea the last game of the season to win the championship. And of course it happened. We had to go to Chelsea, and it was I think winning the championship that season was special because it was the first time. That was the 6th championship I had won. And Kenny still goes on about it yet, because we got up to Scotland the next day to play in his testimonial, his Scottish testimonial. In fact, we went up that night, and all the way up in the plane, I can't believe it. And I'm saying, we've won it, and he's laughing, and he's up, and he keeps going on about it. And he said, even now he'll say, we've won it. And I just couldn't believe that we did win it, because come March time, I think you've got no chance of winning. And even all the way through, we're chasing Everton. I think Everton are going to win. And it was extra special because it was the first time I didn't think we had a chance of winning the championship. And for him to score the winning goal at Chelsea, player manager, the first season, a bit special for him. He's unbelievable at golf, at tiddlywinks, at anything. You play any sport or anything with Kenny, and he wants to win. He really does. And it's the same with arguments. You argue with Kenny, you can't win, because he's so focused on what he's saying, you just can't beat him. So I've learned to control the situation, and I just agree with him. He comes and says, you're hopeless at golf, Alan. Yeah, sure, Kenny. No problem. But he's actually a very good golfer, and he plays a bit more now than he did in the early years at Liverpool, and he's a bit of a bandit off 9. We're always saying he should be, the committee at Hillside where we play should be doing him for general play, and he should be off about 6 or 7. But he'll argue with that as well. We've always had a great relationship, but obviously, like everyone else, you have your ups and downs, and as a player he would snarl at me and say, don't bounce him in, Al. That means when I was playing the ball forward and you try and chip it over 9 players and he's shouting, don't bounce it in. I mean, what chance have you got? I've mentioned before that at his peak you could play it 4 yards either side of him and he'd get it. When he became an old man, about 33, 34, you couldn't bounce it in 6 inches either side of him. You've got to play it perfect into his feet. But we used to have lots of laughs about that. Our relationship throughout the years, he's always been great to me, and he was always great to any of the players that came in the dressing room as a player and manager. And the great thing about Dalglish as a player was that he was always getting accolades, and he was always getting the press and the media attention. And sometimes people can be jealous of that. But the great thing about him was that he prepared for matches, both as a player and a manager, better than anybody I've ever seen. And he would give 100%, 10% every game that he played in. And sometimes he'd be hopeless. But you knew that even when he was hopeless, that he'd still be trying as hard as anybody else, and you knew that he'd still give you something extra. And I think that I've always said that separates the good players from the great players. But the greatest thing about him was he was never a superstar in the dressing room. He was just always one of the boys. Souness was one of the boys. Dalglish was one of the boys. And I think people respected him and liked him for that. That his feet never left the ground. Even when he became player manager. I mean, he told me in the February that he was getting the job. And it was difficult for me to keep quiet, but I mean, it wasn't announced until the May. And I said to him, well, things will change now because you'll be a manager and, I'm in the dressing room. He says, things won't change. Things only change if you want them to change. I said, well, it's going to be difficult. You're going to be a manager and I'm going to be a player, and it's always a them and us situation. But when he became player manager, he would ask my advice and he'd say, how do you think things are going? But he never at any time asked me about any player in the dressing room. He never at any time would want me to give secrets away or tell him stories, and I never told him anything. And I think through that, we remain better and close friends as player and manager. And I think that he was very shrewd, because if at any stage he'd come and said to me, well, what's happening with so-and-so, then right away I would just completely distance myself from him. And we had 15 great years there together. And he was a great player. He was a fantastic manager. I think his record speaks for itself. His record at Blackburn is terrific. He was great as a player, great as a friend. Had our ups and downs, and he snarled at me plenty of times, and I've snarled back at him. And we've had fallouts, and we've had major fallouts, but it's always the same. It's a common theme that Liverpool was important, and I think you've got to have a good guy and a bad guy, and all this. And Ronnie Moran was perceived to be the bad guy, because he'd be the man who'd be shouting the odds, and Roy Evans was the good guy, who he would come in and he'd be the arm around the shoulder, and Ronnie would sort of pull you down for Roy to build you up. But the great thing about that was that everybody knew that Ronnie, in his own way, was a good guy, and he was only doing it for the good of the team. And as soon as it was said, it was forgotten about, and you go on with the next thing. And Ronnie, at times, if people were having a bad time, he would have the hand on the shoulder as well. And I think it worked a treat in the dressing room, where you'd have Ronnie coming in shouting the odds and making pertinent. But it's alright if somebody's shouting the odds in football, as long as the points are pertinent and they're getting near the mark. If you have somebody coming in and shouting the odds and they're getting nowhere near the mark, then you lose total respect, and then you haven't got a coach and you haven't got staff. But when Liverpool coaches and managers were shouting the odds, it was always relevant, because they've got a great wealth of knowledge about the game, that's why it worked so well. I left Liverpool a week after Kenny left, but it was just coincidence. What happened was that I had a scan in my right knee just before Christmas, and it wasn't looking great. I was worried about the long-term implications with arthritis in the knee, and I decided to call it a day then. So I went and I told Kenny and I told Peter Robinson, and they said to me, well, have 3 months and see if you want to be part of the coaching side of things. And I thought, well, it'll pass the time. I'm quite happy to stay here for 3 months. The club were fantastic about everything. They paid me the same money as I was getting as a player. But I knew I was going to retire. And I was just waiting for the actual papers to come through. When I came into the dressing room on the Friday morning, and Kenny, I'd been out for dinner on the Thursday night, and Kenny had left a message to get in touch with him. And I came in late and I thought, I'll see him in the morning. And he comes in and he has this team meeting, and he says, sorry lads, I'm retiring. Well, I couldn't believe it. I knew he was under lots of pressure for the last 3 or 4 months. He'd been having the rashes, he'd been having the injections to get rid of the rashes. But on the Wednesday previously, he had a team meeting with the reserves, and he'd absolutely laid into them. And he didn't look to me then as a man that was going to retire. But certainly looking at him then and looking at him now, it's like night and day. You see pictures of Kenny the day he retired, and he looks like a 6-year-old. And you look at him now and he looks like a 35-year-old. And the pressure, again, must have been so intense, but it really came as a shock to me that he did retire. I thought football was so much part of his life that if you'd have said to me, name 100 people that are liable to retire tomorrow, name 1,000 people, he wouldn't have been in them. And it was just a complete shock. And it was a bigger shock when I go to the training ground and train and come back and find out that I'm 64 on to become the new Liverpool manager. And it's funny because I knew I was retiring the next week. So I go to Peter Robinson and I say, look, I'm 64 on to become the new Liverpool manager. I don't want the job. So Peter Robinson says, well, we better have a press conference and tell everybody that, you're retiring and you don't want the job and you're not going to stay in football. So meanwhile, Liverpool have been beaten on the Saturday at Luton, and they've been beaten by Everton 1-0 on the Wednesday night in the Cup replay. So I come in the Thursday and I said to Ronnie Manan, look, I'm retiring tomorrow. Why don't I come in, have the lads around the table and say to them, we all know why we're here, I'm going to become the new Liverpool manager. So Ronnie said, well, I'll tell you what, do it. I think the lads are really low. Get in, we'll have a laugh. So we tell Roy Evans and Phil Thompson, so we're getting there the next day, we get them all around the table, and I say, well, we all know why we're here. The board have asked me to become the new Liverpool manager, and I'm delighted to take the job. I said, but I've been in this dressing room for a long time, and things are going to change. I know where everybody drinks in Southport, that pub is out of bounds. I know where everybody drinks across the water in the world, that pub is out of bounds. On a Saturday, we're going to video the game. We're going to come on a Sunday, have a light lunch, and go through the game. Well, the heads are getting lower and lower. I said, don't think you'll be leaving the training ground every day at 12:30. We're going to be back 3 afternoons a week. Ball skills. Well, they cannot believe it. So then I say, right, Ronnie, have you got anything to say? And Ronnie said, well, we're right behind you. The coaching staff are behind you. All the best. So that I then come out the dressing room, and this is how quickly the news travels from one dressing room to the other. Because at the reserve team dressing room, there's 3 Irish apprentices come rushing past me, going down the corridor. So I get into the players' lounge, and the 3 of them are on the phone to Dublin, trying to get a bet on me becoming the new Liverpool manager. So what I did was I rushed and grabbed the phone off them and said, don't be stupid. It was only a wind-up, and I thought, well, I better put an end to this. And I go back up the corridors and back into the dressing room, and as I'm approaching the dressing room, all I can hear is a lot of them going, pss, pss, pss. And of course I can hear the name Hansen and 4-letter words and whatever, and it's the power of a manager over players. I get into the dressing room, the first person I see is John Barnes, and he sits up straight and, and keeps his mouth shut. I said, sorry lads, I was only kidding you on. But so that I was actually Liverpool manager for about 20 minutes. Well, I think to play at Wembley any time is very, very special. To play at Wembley in a cup final is extra special. But to play at Wembley in the FA Cup final, as a one-off occasion, is probably the ultimate. I played there in the European Cup final, and I think the European Cup is better to win than the FA Cup. And that's taken for granted, but there's something about the FA Cup final as an occasion. I don't know if it's the charisma or the history of the competition, that it's just is extra special. And for me to go there as a player and as a captain of the Liverpool Football Club, and to go up the steps at Wembley and to lift the FA Cup, and as part of a double winning side, it was just, I mean, you look back at that and you think, the worst part about it is I can't remember going up the steps, and I can't remember very much about picking the trophy up. And I watch it occasionally, and I like to relive the moment, and I like to relive when the final whistle goes, and the feeling of elation that I had, and the running towards your colleagues, and the feeling is just something, as I've said before, you just cannot buy that feeling. And every time I watch it, I'm thinking to myself, what were you thinking when you got up the stairs? Because I just can't remember it. I can remember coming down the other side, and I can remember the laugh of honour, and I can remember in the dressing room. And every time I go to Wembley now, even as a pundit, I come up Wembley way, and I think it's one of the few places in the world I get a real tingle, and I feel very nervous walking into Wembley. And then to go and play at Wembley, I mean, 2:15, which is always the worst time for me. I'd be, that day in 1986, I must have been back and forward to the toilet about 100 times. I was up and down, back and forward to the toilet, and then you get changed, and at 2:30, tell you the team, and a little bit of a team meeting, only for 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'd be back to the toilet and then back, and I'm thinking to myself, right, try and focus on the game. And what I used to say at that time was, even as far back as 1986, try and think that this is the last game you'll ever play, just to make sure it's not a bad one. And of course it's the FA Cup final, and I get onto the pitch for the warm-up, and this is true, my legs have gone. And whether it's because the build-up to the game is different from any other game. The build-up for any normal game, would start 2 days before. The build-up for the FA Cup final starts a week before. And people will phone you up for tickets, and people, the press and the media will phone you up, and people wishing you, phone you up to say all the best, and then you go down to London the day before you'd actually go if it was a normal league game. The preparation is different, and you're a nervous wreck. And I get onto the pitch there at Wembley in the warm-up, and I'm thinking, I'm in trouble here. And it's red hot, and after 5 minutes there's a corner kick, and I'm playing against Everton, and Graham Sharp's centre forward, and he says to me, "It's hot, isn't it?" And that made me feel even worse, and I'm thinking, I can't get through this game. And of course Liverpool lose a goal after 20 minutes, and Gary Lineker scores, and I cringe when I see that goal on television, because as a TV pundit now there'll be white circles everywhere, because I can do one or two things. I can push up, or when Peter Reid gets the ball, I can push up and play Gary offside, or I can just read it and run back and pass it back to Bruce Grobbler. Now, if my mind had been right and my legs had been right, Carl Lewis wouldn't have caught me that day. But because my mind was all over the place, instead of making a move one way or the other, I just stand. Ball gets played over the top. By the time I get back and run back, it's in the back of the net. And to make matters worse, subsequently, somebody does a picture on a postcard of me gazing when the ball was played over the top. And for the next 5 or 6 years, every time I go into W.H. Smith's, I find this postcard face me, and I cringe whenever I see it. Fortunately, it's better laughing at 4:45 than laughing at 3:20. I keep on telling Gary Lineker this, when he says, he gives me a bit of ribbon about that goal, and I say it's better laughing at 4:45 than at 3:20. But right the way through that game, my mind was scrambled, and just fortunately I had 10 good players beside me, and for 55 minutes Everton sort of pummeled us, and we got back in the game and eventually won the game 3-1. And it's just a dream, because in English football people talk about the double being a big thing. Now, you win the Championship, you win the European Cup in 1984, and you win the League Cup, you'd think, yeah, that's big. But people don't talk about that. They talk about the double, which is the FA Cup and the Championship. And to actually achieve that, and for Dalglish in the first year as player manager, and me the first year as captain, was basically the ultimate. My testimonial game, the reception the supporters gave me in my testimonial game, was just mind-boggling. Considering we'd been beaten on the Saturday in the cup final against Wimbledon, my game was on the Monday night, and 33,000 at the game. And afterwards, when I did a lap of honour, it was very emotional for me when my 2 children were the mascot on the night, and obviously all my family were there, and it just meant so much to me to get those accolades from the people I'd played in front of for 10 years, and it's a night I'll never forget. And certainly the last game I played for Liverpool was very good as well, because it was the right way to go out, because we won the Championship. I only played the first half of the game against QPR. I came off at half time with a knee injury, but it was the last game I ever played, and the last game I'd gone down that tunnel with the great sign, "This is Anfield." And it was wonderful to be part of another Championship winning side. 8th Championship, which is a record that Phil Neal and I hold. And it was as good as the first Championship. In fact, it was probably better, because I knew I was coming to an end of a career, a great career, and again the reception from the supporters was just out of this world. And I think I made the most of that night, and I certainly made the most of the lap of honour, getting the Liverpool scarves on your neck, and going to the crowd, and going to the Kop, and then Anfield Road end, and then coming in, and the press and the media being in there, and you're there with your mates, and you're revelling in the glory of it all, and it just is so enjoyable. And again, you look back on those sort of things, and it's just quite wonderful. But obviously, the new job as a TV pundit, it's very difficult for me when Liverpool are playing, especially if I've got to be critical. But the job I'm doing, there's only one way to do it, and that's obviously to be neutral and say what you've got to say. As a pundit, if I was doing Hansen playing for Liverpool, I think there'd be white circles everywhere. In fact, these games are coming back to haunt me. We did the cup final this season, and they had the goal on from I think the 1983 League Cup final against Manchester United with Norman Whiteside turned me and then stuck in the back of the net and ended the goal, and from the 1986 final when Lineker scores, and then the semi-final in 1990, the debacle against Crystal Palace where they scored 4 goals. And I think I might be very critical of myself, but obviously the Hansen answer would be 8 league championships speak for itself. I'm always going to be a Liverpool supporter. There'd be something wrong if I wasn't a Liverpool supporter. But it's difficult to criticise them. And people come to me at times, and it's usually if they're not Liverpool supporters, they say, well, you're doing a great job there, because at least you're neutral. But I think the Liverpool supporters are very fair. And they themselves have got great knowledge of football. They can tell what's happening. I mean, I can point out the finer things and try and go into detail about things, but the good thing for me is that I can still go back to Anfield. I'm made so welcome at Anfield, it's untrue. Not only by the club, but by the supporters. And I don't think I'd ever do anything that would knock that in the head. It means a great deal for me to go back to Liverpool and talk to the supporters and talk to the people at the club. And it's all changed now. I think there's only 2 or 3 players there that were there when I retired. And I never go into the players' lounge, I always go upstairs now. But whenever I meet Liverpool supporters there and anybody connected with the club, it's always good and friendly, and I want it to stay that way.
If you've enjoyed this Alan Hansen tape, you'll enjoy others in our series with Anfield greats Ian St John and Ray Clements.